Hi, this is Anita, the Global Trade Gal. Today I want to talk a little bit about global trade, in particular, a little bit about disruptions in global trade. Lately in the news, there's been a lot of talk about the tariffs, in particular Trump's tariffs. And there's basically two sides of this. There's those who think that all the manufacturing should come back to the United States and that America should produce everything themselves. And they don't care how much it costs, just that we should be producing things ourselves. And there's those who really believe in open and fair trade. I, of course, you would understand, am on the proponent for the latter one because I am basically somebody who believes that trade should be open and fair. And I see the trade on a very personal level every single day. Let me try to explain a couple reasons why it is so difficult to change manufacturing or why it's difficult to move manufacturing to another place. We have done this quite a bit where we have moved manufacturing from China to a factory in Vietnam. And for anything that we produce, which requires us to move that manufacturing, it requires a lot more work for us in the short term until we get it exactly right. You might think, well, it should be easy to just be able to, match something up and to be able to make something in another location. It actually can be extremely difficult. And there's many reasons for that, but some of the reasons are, particularly in my industry, which is home furnishing and home decor. And let's take for an example that we're going to have a piece of furniture that was made in China previously, and let's say it was made by another manufacturer, not by us, and we get the sample of that furniture piece and we're going to make it in Vietnam. We need to first of all get the sample of the piece, and then we need to do a counter sample of it, meaning that we need to show that we can produce it as close or as similar as possible. But each person in manufacturing can have some unique things. There can be unique machinery that's used. We don't know exactly what kind of paint have they previously used. So we have to mix the color of the paint ourselves and get as close to it as we can. We need to look at what techniques they've used. And we need to be able to do all of those things. So it could take us quite a while, or at least a month to really be able to develop that sample and get a sample that we feel then that we can send on to our customer of our client. Then you need to take the time and send it on to the customer and client, and then they need to check it and approve it, and then production starts. So when Trump says these things like he will give 90 days, 90 days leeway for people that won't have to pay the high tariffs and can be able to move their production, it just doesn't work so quickly because even with the 90 days, if you take, the fact that somebody's got to send you the sample, maybe it takes a week or so, you have to look at the sample, study the sample, do a counter sample. A lot of times people might say they can do it within a week or so, but if they haven't really been working on it and haven't quoted the prices, it can take some time. So you've got to look at the price quotes. Then you've got to look and you've got to decide, okay, we're going to produce a sample on this. And then you produce a sample on it. And then, a lot of times the customer wants to see the sample before they do production. So then you send the sample back and then they confirm it. And then from there, you start on the order. Right now, you probably already have lost 30, maybe 45 days. For most things to produce overseas is 60 days. You've already lost the time frame for the 90 days before the tariffs go up. This would be the same process whether you were trying to move something to the United States or whether you're trying to move something to another country. The process pretty much is the same. So we live in a world where I always say to people that, when it comes to the global supply chain, we are living in a world where the global supply chain is getting more and more difficult. There are so many disruptions in the international global supply chain, and it has definitely become worse. So anyone who's in the global supply chain needs to look and say, how can I so-called navigate these choppy waters of the global supply chain? How can I learn to be able to weather any type of storm? A lot of it's difficult because there are some products which I'm helping some people source for now, which really 90% of the business is done in China. So if you have somebody who, let's say, produces 90% of all the toys for the world, or art supplies or other things like that, those type of supply chains just do not move overnight. Why? Because you don't have the materials in place. There is not the technology in place. There are many other things that are not in place to be able to move it. And then on top of that, you have the capacity, where you might even be able to find someone who can produce what you need, but they may not be willing to produce it. Why? They simply don't have the capacity. Because they, like everyone else, need to be able to train up workers, get workers in. They need to make sure the workers know what they're doing, and they need to ensure that the quality is up to standard. That is why moving supply chains or moving production is very costly and very complicated. So, you can do all you can to try to navigate these so-called choppy waters. You can try to, you can try to ensure that, somehow, maybe you feel like you have the magic formula, but it really is not as easy as it seems because there's so many things that need to be looked at. As I've said before, it comes basically down to three basic things. One is, can someone produce the quality? Even though they're producing the products that you need, it doesn't mean that they have the ability to produce the quality that you need. Those can be two very, very different things. Quality can be something which could be basically a barrier within the supply chain itself. The other thing is the price. They need to be able to produce it at a price which is comparable or comparable within reason of what you're buying now. When all of this came about with the tariffs, where I was really looking at all of these tariffs and what are we going to do and everything, I started looking at other places that we have not normally looked at for production, places such as Malaysia and Singapore. And I can tell you for some of the prices that I got from these other places, our cost was 100 to 300% higher than we are buying now in Vietnam. And I know there's been similar things when I've looked at things from China to Vietnam, where our cost in Vietnam was much higher than China. So price is another one of the factors that must be looked at besides quality. Can they produce the quality? Can they produce it at the price? And the last one is, of course, quantity. Even though if they can produce the quality and let's say somehow you're lucky they can do the price, can they give you the quantity that you need? That's one reason why a lot of the big manufacturers in the United States, the big stores in the United States, such as Walmart or, you look at Walmart or Target or, Home Depot or some of these others, still continue to buy from China after the first round of tariffs that happened during the first Trump administration. Why? Because of the fact that even if they could find maybe someone to produce the quality, and even they could find someone to produce it, at a price that they could accept, they couldn't find someone to produce the quantity that they needed. They needed a much larger quantity. And the China factories, many of them are set up to be able to produce that huge quantity which is needed. I mean, there are factories that I've seen in China that are producing 1,000 containers a month. If you can imagine, 1,000 containers a month, you have to imagine how big that factory is, how many workers it has, how much machinery it has, and how efficient and effective a factory like that would be to be able to produce those type of quantities. You think about it, that they would be loading, how many containers they would need to load every single day or every single work day to be able to do that. It's a lot. So you'd have to have the people that can do the loading. You have to have people that can do do all the documents. You have to have all of that in place in order to ship that type of quantity. That's why when we talk about things like the global supply chain, why disruptions in it, like has been happening now, are so difficult and so hard to fix. And they're difficult and hard to fix in the short term. It really, really takes a long-term process because it is not easy. My coworker, James Johnson, has written a blog entitled Optimizing Global Supply Chain Design. And in there he talks about some of the disruptions, risk management, regulatory compliances, and how complex they can be, technologies and integration and other things like that. And we'll put a link to his blog in our description in case you're interested and be able to read more and learn more about this. But I wanted today to really focus on basically, one area of this, which is basically disruption of the supply chain and how difficult it is to change the supply chain and change it overnight. It is not easy. It is extremely difficult. And on top of that, I just want to point out that there are many things which we produce which will not come back to America. Things such as basket weaving or, I believe like furniture making. Those can be sort of messy businesses to be in. If you go into a furniture factory, there can be dust, there can be sawdust and other things. And there's just not the skill. And I don't think like Americans want to sit in their home and weave baskets. They just don't want to do it at a price that would be even that wouldn't mean that the basket you're suddenly buying is going to cost you $1,000. They just don't want to do that. Those are not the industries that are going to come back. And so where I'm all for, manufacturing coming back in America, but I think it needs to be targeted manufacturing and not the manufacturing that America will not do again. There's no point at all in us putting a tax on things such as vanilla when we don't produce vanilla, or baskets when we don't weave baskets, or furniture when there's so little furniture production of the type that we do, or other types of things like hand painting or lacquer or mother of pearl or other things like that, which are just not done in the United States anymore. We hope that you've enjoyed this and this little bit of wisdom that I'm giving, and that you will subscribe to our podcast. We'd love to have you subscribe to us. If you rate us, because that really does help with people to be able to find us and with the ratings. And that we hope that you've enjoyed this. We appreciate you joining and being part of us.